Welcome to Demystifying Iran. On February 11, 2026, enormous rallies swept across Iran, marking the 47th anniversary of the victory of the Islamic Revolution. But one event in Tehran's 4 million strong gathering caught the world's attention. Demonstrators set fire to a massive statue, a horned, bull-headed effigy. They called it Baal, an ancient Canaanite deity, a false god, a symbol of deviation from monotheism. Carved onto this idol was the so-called Star of David. For the demonstrators, Baal is not just ancient history, he is a bridge linking the past to modern politics. The idol symbolized what the Iranian organizers view as the moral corruption of the Western elite, embodied by the shocking scandal and ongoing cover-up regarding Jeffrey Epstein and the extraordinarily dark Epstein files. Iranian demonstrators and organizers do not see Epstein as a lone, worthless criminal. They see him as a product, the logical outcome of Western liberalism and capitalism. For the Islamic Republic, Jeffrey Epstein is not an aberration. He is the natural result of a civilization built on principles they fundamentally reject. What the demonstrators emphasize is not merely Epstein's individual crimes. It is the enormous network of oligarchs and men of great influence who move through his world, what is now being called the Epstein Class. These extraordinarily powerful people interacted with him, were complicit in his countless atrocities, or had knowledge of his horrific actions, as well as his very close affiliation with the Mossad, and chose to look away. From Tehran's perspective, this network reveals a fundamental structural feature of Western power. Illegitimate wealth and influence have created unprecedented zones of moral and legal impunity. Consider Epstein's 2008 plea deal in Florida, a remarkably lenient sentence despite overwhelming evidence. For Iran, that is not a failure of the system. That is the system working exactly as designed. So when you see that statue burning, this is the framework. The organizers are not just making a political statement, they are making three arguments. First, the Epstein case exposes a Western elite that operates above the law and preys upon the vulnerable and oppressed at home and abroad. Second, this corrupt elite is tightly bound to Zionist ideology and the genocidal Israeli regime, symbolized by the Star of David carved into the idol. Third, the Islamic Republic of Iran positions itself as the moral alternative, a system of governance that ideologically stands against such outrageous corruption by grounding law in religious and moral principles. The crimes of Jeffrey Epstein and his many co-conspirators are well documented, though almost completely hidden by an utterly corrupt and complicit ruling elite. Only 2% of the actual material has been published, and even that contains major redactions. The recruitment, trafficking, enslavement, and murder of underage girls and even infants, the many hidden co-conspirators. It is now even being questioned whether the only named co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell, is actually in prison. And if she is, we are told that the U.S. government has ensured she is facing the most favorable conditions possible. Epstein is dead. At least that is the official narrative, which many now question. His 2019 jail cell death was ruled a suicide, although no one who believes he is dead believes he committed suicide. But the unsealed files reveal something far larger than one man's moral depravity. Across millions of mostly redacted pages, a deeper truth emerges. The existence of a network bound by an evil ideology and by complicity, a class for whom shared satanic secrets became the basis of allegiance, and shared vulnerability became the currency of coalition. This network was not merely social, it was operational. When a political figure accepted support from this network, they incurred a debt. When that support was undocumented or deniable, the debt was not financial, it was personal. And when the network held compromising information on that figure, the debt became permanent. This is how alliances are forged in the shadow world the Epstein files exposed, not through shared ideology alone, but through shared vulnerability. Courageous survivors have testified about being instructed to serve and report on their dark experiences with powerful men. Flight logs document who traveled to the island and when. Emails capture casual references that become deeply significant in retrospect. This accumulation of information had major political consequences. Senior politicians and other men of influence who visited Epstein's island or townhouse placed themselves in a position of vulnerability in order to join the club of the powerful. If that information became public, their careers would end. If it remained private, they owed a debt to Epstein, to his associates, to Mossad, to whoever controlled the information. The compromising material could always be used for leverage among the Epstein class. How regularly Epstein actively used his information for blackmail is almost beside the point. The structural reality is that the information existed, and anyone who knew what happened on that island and remained silent was, in effect, protecting not just themselves, but everyone else who was there. No one can expose anyone else without exposing themselves, assuming anyone would believe them. Hence, a wall of silence protects the entire network of darkness. This is how the Epstein class operates. This is how the West operates. This is how Zionism operates. Not necessarily through overt conspiracy, but often through the gravitational pull of access to opportunities so dark that normal human beings could never contemplate them. Not through ideological commitment, but through the quiet understanding that exposure would be catastrophic, especially since the Epstein class and Mossad had and still have all the levers of power at their disposal. Complicity becomes currency. Shared vulnerability becomes the basis of trust. Those bound by dark secrets are bound to one another across parties, across borders, across the institutions supposedly designed to hold them accountable. The files, though heavily redacted, show us the machinery. They also show us the product, a global elite so entangled in shared compromise that its capacity to govern with any integrity is fundamentally compromised. A political class for whom the primary allegiance is not to the public but to the Zionist network. And within that network, we find the strong threads of foreign policy itself. When U.S. presidents, politicians, and diplomats are compromised, negotiations become skewed, as the Clinton affair with Monica Lewinsky revealed. When Mossad collects secrets on the powerful, leverage accumulates. When billionaires can buy access to presidents and princes, the line between private interest and public policy dissolves entirely. This is the true significance of the Epstein files, not merely the crimes of one corrupt man, but the partial exposure of a dark and deeply entrenched system of power. International alliances are usually discussed in terms of shared interests, diplomatic negotiations, and formal agreements. The Epstein network suggests something different. Alliances forged through shared participation in deeply corrupt environments. Consider the geographic scope of the little information that has been released. In the United Kingdom, Prince Andrew's friendship with Epstein continued for years after the 2008 conviction. Photographs of the prince at Epstein's townhouse became iconic. His civil settlement with Virginia Giuffre ended his public duties and damaged the royal family's standing beyond repair. Yet we know this is just the tip of the iceberg. In France, a former culture minister lost his position after being named in unsealed documents. In Norway, an ambassador resigned. A former prime minister is under investigation. The crown princess publicly apologized. All appear in flight logs or correspondence. In Slovakia, a national security advisor was forced out. None are accused of crimes, only of proximity. In fact, no one named in the Epstein files is being prosecuted. The dark power of the Epstein class can still protect almost all of those whose crimes were left unredacted. With the Israeli regime, the connections are very extensive. Former Prime Minister Ehud Barak maintained an extremely close relationship with Epstein. Emails show extensive contact with a Barak aide with Israeli military intelligence background who stayed for extended periods at Epstein's New York residence. Epstein also donated heavily to Friends of the Israeli Defense Forces and the Jewish National Fund. Additionally, Epstein connected the Israeli regime with governments across the world and played a major role in strengthening its ties with U.S. tech giants. The Israeli dimension is highly significant. Western intelligence agencies collect information on powerful people. A financer who cultivated global elites and created environments where the most powerful people in the world place themselves in compromising positions, that is invaluable to any sinister and amoral Western intelligence service, especially Mossad. This does not require formal recruitment, only that information was shared or accessible. Then there is the Robert Maxwell connection. Maxwell, Ghislaine's father, was long known to be a key figure working for Israeli intelligence. He died mysteriously in 1991, falling from his yacht after his business empire collapsed. A 2018 email from Epstein suggested that Maxwell had threatened to expose his Mossad work unless they provided financial assistance, meaning Epstein himself knew of the intelligence connection and the reason for his death.
Some claimed Maxwell had worked with the Israeli Mossad, perhaps even as an operative. His funeral in Israel was attended by top figures in the Israeli government and intelligence community, a gesture rarely granted to foreign businessmen.
And I think the real answer is Jeffrey Epstein was working on behalf of intel services, probably not American.
He accompanied fellow British business tycoon Gerald Ronson to a meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister. For decades, Maxwell had kept his Jewish roots private, but Ronson convinced him to admit his ancestry. Midway through their meeting, Maxwell announced he wanted to invest $250 million in Israel and agreed to share security intel with the Mossad. Maxwell kept his word.
But it goes beyond intelligence. For example, messages between Epstein and Steve Bannon discussed funding models for European far-right parties. Contact lists were made for nationalist leaders. Strategies were made for undermining the European Union from within. Bannon spoke openly of raising money for Marine Le Pen and Matteo Salvini using Epstein's resources. The pattern is not a single conspiracy. It is overlapping networks, financial elites, political figures, intelligence operatives, royalty, all moving through shared spaces. Information accumulating, favors exchanged, compromising material generated, mutual knowledge creating mutual protection. This is the international architecture of the Epstein class, a web across borders, binding the powerful through shared access and shared vulnerability. That statue burned in Tehran was not merely a protest. It was a declaration of identity. For the demonstrators and organizers, burning an idol that represents Western corruption and moral bankruptcy is also an act of defining what they stand against, and by extension, what they stand for. To understand this, one must examine how the Islamic Republic defines itself in opposition to the Epstein class that the files exposed. On one side, the Epstein files reveal a Western Zionist alliance system built on compromised individuals bound together by shared dark secrets, mutual vulnerability, and the currency of blackmail. On the other side, Iran presents a model of alliance rooted in something entirely different: brotherhood, shared history, religious and moral values, defending the oppressed, and principled resistance. This position is also rooted in the region's history. From Tehran's perspective, the moral corruption of the West cannot be separated from its colonial past or its liberal capitalist present. The same powers now facing exposure through the Epstein files, the United States, Britain, France, among others, are the powers that carved up the world among themselves for centuries. The establishment of the Israeli regime in 1948 is presented within this framework as the culmination of colonial violence, an entity imposed by Western powers against the will of the indigenous Palestinian population, maintained through military force and the darkness of Zionist supremacism. For the Islamic Republic of Iran, the corruption revealed in the Epstein files is not an aberration. It is the logical expression of a civilization built on exploitation, one that continues to ruthlessly exploit. The same impulse that drove colonial powers to divide and dominate foreign lands now drives the Epstein class to horrifically exploit the vulnerable, even within their own societies. Against this model of alliance through blackmail, Iran positions its own partnerships as rooted in something else entirely. Central to this framing is the legacy of Ashura. The martyrdom of Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Holy Prophet, in the land of Karbala, is a defining event in Islam. Imam Hussein's stand against the morally bankrupt tyrant Yazid is understood as a timeless struggle between justice and oppression, truth and falsehood, the righteous few against the corrupt powerful. This is not merely historical commemoration. It is a living framework for understanding contemporary alliance.
هرچی درباره فساد اینها شنیده بودیم، یک طرف این قضیه این جزیره بدنام و فاسد هم یک طرف. اینا در واقع نشون دهنده تمدن غرب. اینی که ما راجع به تمدن غرب، راجع به لیبرال دموکراسی غرب حرف میزنیم، اینه. 200 سال 300 سال حرکت میکنن، نتیجهش میشه یه چنین چیزی. این یه نمونه است، این جزیره یه نمونه است. از این قبیل حرفا خیلی زیاد است. همچنانی که این آشکار نبود آشکار شد، خیلی چیزای دیگه هم هست که آشکار خواهد شد.
That is why Ayatollah Khamenei, speaking at a public event on Tuesday, alluded to the Epstein scandal and to Donald Trump, and reminded his audience how Imam Hussein said, someone like me would not pledge allegiance to someone like Yazid. He added that the people of Iran would thus never accept Trump's domination. When the Islamic Republic of Iran forms partnerships with movements across the region, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Palestine, Ansarullah in Yemen, the Hashid in Iraq, it frames these relationships within a religious, moral, and historical continuum. These are not partnerships of convenience. They are bonds forged through shared commitment to a cause greater than any individual or state. From Tehran's perspective, the Western term proxy is a deliberate distortion. It imposes a framework of hierarchical control onto relationships based on ideological alignment and brotherhood. Hezbollah, Hamas, Ansarullah, Islamic Jihad, the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq and Venezuela, they all exercise strategic autonomy precisely because they share Iran's vision that resistance to Western domination and Israeli occupation is a religious and moral duty for everyone, even though safe and far from oppression. It is self-sacrifice for the oppressed that goes beyond sisters and brothers in faith. It is for a brotherhood in humanity. No blackmail is required. No compromising information is needed to ensure compliance. The alliances are rooted in what the parties believe to be truth, justice, equality, and a common humanity. They emerge organically from shared historical understanding and common religious or moral values. When the demonstrators in Tehran carved the Star of David onto the idol of Baal, they were making a specific argument. The Epstein class represents the true nature of Western power, corrupt, exploitative, bound together by dark secrets and shame. The alliance between the United States and the Israeli regime is obviously not exempt from this judgment. It is central to it. The burning of the statue is therefore an act of defiance and a declaration of difference. The question now is whether this narrative will resonate further beyond Tehran's borders. In a world where the Epstein files have shattered the undeserved trust of the naive in Western institutions, the Islamic Republic of Iran's message that it offers a moral alternative to the Epstein class may find unexpected listeners. See you next week.